You're listening to a special episode of Energy Insiders, presented by Giles Parkinson and brought to you by Australia's most anticipated energy event, Energy Exchange Australia, from March 10th to 12th at the Perth Convention and Exhibition Centre.
Dr. Francis Norman, thank you very much for joining the Energy Insiders podcast, this special episode.
Thank you. Thanks very much for being here. And looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, well, look, why don't we just actually start off with, you're the head of the Centre of Decommissioning Australia. What is it and what does it do?
I thought that was going to be the first question. Centre of Decommissioning Australia, we were, I'll use the term a government minister used when I was talking with him a few years ago. We were invented in 2019 in response to a recognition broadly speaking, in the oil and gas industry, so operators, government, regulators, supply chain, and so forth, that we were heading into a period of a lot of activity in decommissioning, and we didn't really have our industry wasn't ready for the volume of work. We didn't have any sort of body, if you like, that could go out there and spruik what was coming up. That could act as a coordinator, try and entice people to come here, bring technologies here, and so forth. So we were, as I say, invented 2019, 2020, and then since then we spent the first 18 months. The term I use often is we were incubated inside of another organisation, and then in December 2021 we spun out as an independent. So we function as an independent, not-for-profit industry peak body now for the decommissioning industry for Australia. And what's the decommissioning industry, I guess, is the next question that would come on there. So in the context of what we do, decommissioning applies to the oil and gas industry. And it is essentially the obligation that the industry has at the end of the production life of any oil and gas asset to safely and in perpetuity close down and remove the facilities and the assets that have been used to extract the hydrocarbons, and then to satisfaction of the regulators and the ministers in charge to leave it in as good a condition as they can on completion.
Okay, so is it just offshore or is it onshore as well?
It's both. Australia is unusual compared to a lot of the jurisdictions that we deal with around the world in that it has a significant onshore as well as offshore. So often when we first started, we looked at who was doing this around the world: North Sea, UK, Brazil, UK, Norway, Denmark, Holland, Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico, as it was referred to back then, Brazil. Most of those jurisdictions, the majority of their work is offshore. For Australia, we've got a very significant offshore piece, and that's really where the focus has been. It's where most of our focus has been to date. But we also have a very large onshore oil and gas footprint that over time will reach end of life.
Yeah. And you just mentioned sort of hydrocarbon industry, but I'm guessing it should also apply, I see from your website, it should also apply in future to the offshore wind industry. Does it apply also to the onshore wind and solar industry?
So the way I would refer with that is right now in the offshore space, when Australia does get to the point of installing offshore wind,
well, it's got to build it first.
It's got to get there. The installed offshore wind facilities will have to comply to essentially the same legislative requirements as the oil and gas industry. And what's happened there is that the regulator for safety and environment for the offshore wind industry has mirrored the regulations that we have for the oil and gas industry. So right now for oil and gas, the base case is full removal, and unless you can demonstrate certain things can be left behind without causing any long-term issues. In the onshore space, onshore things like onshore wind, quite honestly, they're a little bit of a mess. There's because of the times when some of these were installed, people hadn't thought about what they were going to do with them when they reached end of life. Who carries financial liability? Who's responsible for a wind farm on a farmer's paddock that's been there for 25 years? There's some real challenges still to work through in there. For us right now, oil and gas just offshore is around about a $60 billion Australia industry if you take $20, and that could be significantly more, or it could be a little bit less than that. To fully remove everything over the full life cycle, it takes out to 2060, 65. For a little team of 4 people, that's a big enough industry at the moment for us to try and work our way through.
That sounds like enough. So you're not touching onshore wind or onshore solar.
We don't at the moment. We don't. Many of the companies that form our network, if you like, so we're a partner-based, a member-based organization. Many of those companies, they will and are doing decommissioning works for onshore power stations, refineries, defense, and all sorts of other industries.
Because we've seen a lot of coal-fired power stations have been decommissioned, pulled apart. So that hasn't come up to your remit then. So you're specifically. So who funds your organization? Where's the money coming from?
Now, there's a question I've never heard before. Who funds us? Look, we were incredibly fortunate that, first off, where we were incubated for those first few years was in a federal government agency by the name of NERA. NERA was one of the 6 industry growth centres. As NERA was reaching the end of its funding, we, in discussion with them, took the option to spin Coda out. So they helped us up until that point. So they got us up, they got us running, they got us started, along with support from industry as well, who saw the need for what we had. The next phase, if you like, that the going into sort of over the last 3.5 years where we are now, the big believer in us in those very early days was the West Australian government. They provided us with a 4-year grant. We're in year 4 of that now, and that enabled us in those first couple of years, as we were really starting to get going and becoming independent, that enabled us to really sort of get going and build our capability quickly. And then as time has gone by, we've signed on somewhere around about 160 what we call partner companies, so members, and there's a fee associated with each of those memberships. So we're at the point now where that we've got what I would say a pretty healthy balance between industry and some ongoing support from our friends in the West Australian government. So yeah, we try then through that to function and operate as independently as we can, because we have such a broad member base. It's service sector companies, it's the supply chain right the way through. It's the oil and gas companies, it's government, and so forth. You're
not the bunny of big oil or something like that.
No, we're not. No, we're not. We try and be dispassionate, and the way I would often refer to it is we advocate in lowercase for the benefit of the industry as a whole, so that the industry is able to do the work that needs to be done efficiently, safely, and give us these best outcomes that we can have, that the wells are plugged in perpetuity, done properly first time, that the infrastructure gets removed safely, gets brought to shore. When it gets to shore, in the offshore context, obviously if it's onshore, it's already there. In the offshore context, it gets brought to shore, and then once it arrives onshore, we have a well-equipped, capable industry here who can dismantle that material and then recycle as much as possible through all of that. And those are our guiding lights, I guess, as an organization.
Okay, so just tell us, tell the audience a bit about the scale of the challenge. I mean, you mentioned $60 billion industry. I guess that's not $60 billion a year, but it's $60 billion sort of total remit of, and then that would be a guesstimate, I guess. I saw a figure in one of your reports that you published last year of 5.7 million tons of stuff.
Yep,
That needs to be
stuff. Yeah,
pipes and platforms,
structures. Yeah.
Goodness, what else? So yeah, tell us about.
Yeah, the 5.7 million tons of stuff, assuming full removal. And this is where it gets quite grey, that some of this material will be left in situ. There's things like a pile that's been driven 60 meters into the seabed. To try and remove that, I mean, they were installed there to be there forever. To try and go in and remove those things would be a horrible, horrible job. So some things will be left in situ, and that will be decided on a project by project basis between the owner and the regulator. But fundamentally, that 5 point whatever let's call it 6 for argument, for round numbers. That 6 million tons of material is made up. First, the largest portion in there is carbon steel. It's regular steel, it's a slightly nicer steel, but it's the similar sorts of steel to what your car bodies, construction steel would be used. And that forms the structures that sit out there in the ocean. It forms the structures that sit onshore. It's the material in the pipelines. So that's the largest single proportion. Interestingly, the next proportion by weight is concrete. Concrete is used so if you lay a pipeline on the seabed and you're going to fill it with gas, you want that pipeline to be heavy enough that it's going to stay where you put it. So you put a concrete weight coating on the outside. So if those pipelines get removed, then there's going to be a lot of concrete will come out with there. We also use concrete. We lay what they call concrete mattresses, which look like chocolate blocks held together with rope. We lay them over pipelines to protect them and so forth. So a lot of that material will get removed. Then you start to get into non-ferrous and other metals, so all the coppers and fancy grades of stainless steels and so forth. A lot of plastic. Well, it seems like a lot of plastic. There's about 400,000 tons potentially of plastic, which when you say it like that is a lot of plastic. Most of that is on the outer skins and the internals of cables and flexible pipelines. That material will all get removed as well. So all of this will come out. And then, as I say, the next job then is to decontaminate the things that have had hydrocarbons flow through them so that they can then be recycled. And that is the decontamination is quite a challenging task to do. Some of these things don't want to let go. You get some of this stuff, it hangs on, it gets itself almost ingrained into the material. But once all that lot's been done, then you've got a lot of very high value material there. And then the next phase, and it's really interesting that we have this sort of thread, if you like, through the middle of what we do, which is the traditional decommissioning, the closing, removal, and so forth. But then at each end, we've got like a bulb of extracurricular things. The recycling piece is a fascinating area on the one end, and on the other end is alternate uses for these fields once we've extracted all of this gas. So can we use them for carbon sequestration? Those sorts of things as well. So my day job can be very variable. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And what about the sort of the physical challenges of actually getting this stuff out of the ocean, as it were? I mean, I guess a floating platform can simply be towed or something. I mean, look, I don't know. I'm just guessing.
They're towed. Yeah.
It looks like it floats. I guess you can tow it. It's really just the subsea infrastructure, isn't it? The stuff on the sea.
The big challenging ones are what we call it's the fixed assets. It's the fixed structures. So you have what we call a jacket, which is essentially an open frame metal structure. Looks like an electrical pylon, except it's heavy duty. It's big pipes that this is made from, and they stand on the seabed, and then they protrude out through the waves at the top. And these can be 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 meters and more tall. So you've got this huge steel structure that stands, that's on the seabed to hold the top sides in place. And then on the top sides itself is where you've got accommodation modules where the workers would live while they're working offshore in this, along with process equipment that receives, cleans, and so forth the hydrocarbons before it then goes back over the side into a pipeline.
Right. So that's not getting towed away.
No, you can't tow that stuff. No, you've got to come in with very clever technologies. You cut the legs of the jacket. You cut the top of the jacket. You remove the top. The top sides would come off on a very big crane onto a barge. That barge would then take things into shore. The jackets themselves, you'd cut either a whole jacket in one piece or you'd cut it into maybe a couple of slices, and then they would get loaded onto a barge and brought to shore as well. The largest, most complex one that we've got coming up in Australia is going to be in Victorian waters it's over the Christmas period, 27 to 28. Esso, as we still refer to them, Exxon, have got one of the world's largest heavy lift vessels. So essentially a very big boat with a crane on each end to come in and lift 12 of these platforms out in one 3-month period over that Christmas period. And when I say large heavy lift vessel, you imagine 2 oil tankers assembled as a catamaran with a crane on each end. That's essentially what you're looking at with this thing. It is a monster.
And in Bass Strait too.
In the Bass Strait,
Which
yes.
can be fun as anyone who's sailed across.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I think a catamaran of that size is probably going to be relatively stable, even in the Bass Strait. But it is still going to be a phenomenal. And these are, these technical challenges are what get a lot of people in our industry out of bed on a morning, because these are things that weren't designed to be easily removed. They were designed to be robust and to survive all sorts of climatic conditions for decades. And now they're at that point where, right, thank you, you've done your job. Now we want to take you away, retire you, recycle you. They don't want to come out. So this is going to be some fascinating work over these next few years.
And the Victorian oil fields are interesting because they're probably the first to close, the first to open, the first to be
They
built.
were the first ones to open, and they on scale like this will be the first and probably the only time in Australian waters we'll have so many platforms come out at once. Western Australia, we've got a number of quite small platforms. Some of these literally, monopile, so just one single leg with a small process equipment on the top. But we also have 3 very large, 25,000 ton topsides and 25,000 ton platform structures. So we've got a real mixed bag here, and we've got an enormous quantity of flexibles and umbilicals, as we refer to them, essentially cables and flexible pipelines to remove as well, which is where all this plastic sits.
Flexibles and umbilicals.
Yes. Oh, we get some wonderful terminology in industry. We really do.
Has this been done at all in Australia? Have we decommissioned our first offshore platform, or
we've done a few small ones?
Just a few small ones, okay.
Yeah, this week, literally, I think, as we are recording this, Santos are on with their next one. They're removing one that's known as the Harriet Alpha platform, which is right now will be the largest platform to be removed from Australia. And it's, from memory, it's around about 1,000 tons. So the substructure is 1,000 tons, and then the top side, I think, is about 2. And that will get removed. It's in the northwest, so it's up sort of Karratha, offshore Karratha area, and it will get removed, put onto a couple of barges, and then brought down to Kwinana, south of Perth, for dismantling and recycling.
Right, okay. And you said that you guys were invented in 2018 and needed to be invented, but is that because the industry also, didn't really think too hard about, also focused on building these things so they could last? It wasn't maybe focused. Why did you need to be invented?
It was because of how large the step change was. There was a significant change of legislation that went through in that 2019-2020 period, off the back of a very well documented. There was a project called the Northern Endeavour, which is what they call a floating production storage offloading. So essentially, an oil tanker that receives oil from the sea, from subsea wells. The owners had gone into administration. The fallout from that was that at the time, the responsibility then for decommissioning fell to the federal government. So federal government said, okay, yep, that's the law, we'll take it on. But there was a few things that came through from that. The first was they changed the legislation. So when it happens in the future, it's less likely that it'll fall back to the government. Next one was they brought in a levy. So they are recovering all of the costs for the decommissioning of the Northern Endeavour from the industry itself. So all of the companies that produce hydrocarbons are now paying into the recycling and the decommissioning costs for the Northern Endeavour. But the other thing that really made a difference, and the reason, probably the biggest reason to invent us, was there was a change of expectations from government to the regulator, and then from the regulator to industry, that they had to start doing this work in a more timely manner. So where in the past industry had said, look, we've finished producing from this particular well, we'll close it in, we'll make sure it's safe, we'll monitor it, and then when we have, call it a critical mass, when we have a large enough volume of material, we'll come back and we'll do all the decommissioning works on it. And government essentially came back and said, we'd actually like you to do it more soon than that. And that meant that there was this significant catch-up phase that industry had to enter. And that was really what was the trigger for then looking around saying, okay, we can do small jobs now and again with what we have without coordination, but we really needed the coordination and the sort of the effort of a body like ourselves to get on with that.
And that sounds like what's happening then. I might be leaping to conclusions here. In Victoria, for instance, you said that you got this massive sort of catamaran sort of oil tanker coming through and whipping away. Whipping away is a bit of a no, not quite as easy as that. About a dozen of these platforms. So presumably some of these things have been sitting there for a while, not producing, and just waiting for someone to come along and take them away.
Esso had planned to start my understanding at least, sorry, Esso had planned to start the planning to do the removal probably around about now. Whereas the government said, no, we'd actually like you to start it immediately, please, and we'd like to get on with it a bit sooner. So it messed with the plans of a few of these companies. It forced activity to come forward a little bit. But for us, what it meant was we got to be put in place ahead of time. So we've been along the journey as the industry has taken on more and more of this work. And I would actually say that it's been really effective to have an organization like us helping to coordinate as a single point of knowledge, if you like, for industry. Particularly, this is a global industry. A lot of the technologies we rely on are international. They're coming out of the UK, they're coming out of Norway, they're coming out of the US, they're coming out of wherever. We needed mechanisms and advocacy to attract those companies and for them to think, oh, actually, spending 2, 3, 4 years with my technology based in Australia is something that's worth doing.
So you need the equipment and you need the expertise to be here to actually do these projects or do commissioning.
And what we're hoping now, because Australia is one of the few jurisdictions in the world that has this time expectation now on its decommissioning, because we are doing so much of this now here, we actually have an opportunity to catch up and in some cases get ahead of some of the rest of the countries and some of the other jurisdictions that are doing this work. So we will then have a chance both to prove these technologies here, also build up our expertise to then work as a supporting partner, if you like, for want of a better term, with all of particularly our Asia Pacific nation friends. Practically all of our northern neighbours are heading into a decommissioning wave. Countries like Brazil are on a journey similar to ours. They're maybe 18 months behind us, if you like, in terms of when they got started. So we have an opportunity as a coordinated industry here to take this knowledge and this expertise that we're building now and take it back out into the rest of the world. That's sort of my optimistic view for where I'd like us to be in a few years.
Yeah, and look, and I guess the decommissioning industry and the recycling industry, I mean, it does have some sort of, there are issues with it. I mean, I think we've seen in the mining industry, sort of mines being abandoned by, someone going bankrupt and nobody picking up the tab, and the creation of phantom companies. Millions of Australians take care in putting stuff into yellow bins and red bins and green bins, and then read stories about how it all just ends up in the same place and doesn't go anywhere and goes into the same landfill. And I think your own report also, that one that was produced in June last year, talks about, how did you guys describe it? It was sort of a, it's a, I can't even think of the word now. The industry just sort of so many changes. You get people who emerge and then they get snapped up by others. It's a very transient industry, I think.
It is very transient, yes.
Which sounds like an issue. It shouldn't be a transient issue.
Recycling, I get very frustrated in Australia about our recycling and the lack of maturity and the lack of governance and so forth around our recycling industry. Not specific to my own industry, more broadly speaking. Exactly as you say, individual families, they do a great job. They wash out the metal cans, they put them in the recycling bin, they put the plastics in there, they go away, and you trust that this will eventually get recycled, find a good home somewhere. And far, far, far too often, we hear stories of soft plastics stored in a warehouse and then the warehouse burns down, or things getting shipped off to other countries. And I would love to see more effort nationally into building recycling industries, waste management in a much better way, so that we don't just put things into landfill. And I think the high level of governance, particularly that the oil and gas industry has, both through its own efforts and also, honestly, through the scrutiny that it gets from everybody else, is really driving it towards trying to find the best ways possible to recycle so much of this material. And it
It could actually make the whole industry more robust than yours.
Yeah. The 40,000 tons a year of scrap steel that's going to be generated through the oil and gas industry's decommissioning contributes, I mean, in round numbers, it contributes about 1/10 of what you need to feed an electric arc furnace to turn scrap steel back into good steel again. So we've got that as an opportunity in there. The high grade stainless and so forth, we have no industry in Australia to recycle that. That will get exported. But if we can consolidate it and export it, we can make sure at least that high grade stainless steel that comes out of a valve from the oil and gas industry or the mining industry or the power industry will find its way back into something similar, or into some high grade cutlery or whatever wherever that steel itself goes.
High grade cutlery.
High grade cutlery. You want, if you're going to put food in your mouth, you want to know it's not rusty. But then but then the plastics is and the polymers is a really interesting, really challenging space. Simple plastics, the things that make the water bottles that we buy and things like that, they're relatively easy to recycle. But then you get very quickly into way more complex polymers, vehicle tires. You see so many pictures of just mountains of car tires and truck tires around the place. In the oil and gas industry, these flexible cables and flexible pipelines, they are built through both mechanical strength and very clever chemistry in the polymers to last and be almost indestructible. But then when you want to recycle them, you're faced with having to deal with all of these challenges. So we've got some really, really interesting challenges to work through in there. There's some amazing research going on at a couple of our universities at the moment to start to look at those. The next challenge then is scaling. But the plastics that they're dealing with, the polymers they're dealing with there, are not that different from the plastics and polymers that go up to make cables in coal-fired power stations, like we were talking about earlier, transmission lines and so forth. So there is a large volume of this. So we have a lot of opportunities.
And a lot of this work, I presume, needs to be done subsea at depth.
The removal of all our stuff, done at
Yeah.
at depth.
I mean, that's already an extraordinary working conditions for the people working on the oil rigs as they're operating. I mean, teams of them, and they sort of spend the whole week in sort of pressurized environment, and just ready to be able to do whatever it is that they need to do down there. And I guess that's going to be the same thing. So, I mean, do we have enough specialists? Do we have enough expertise? Do we have enough funding for this all? I mean,
the money is there. The money is there. The oil and gas companies themselves are all very aware that they are responsible for paying their costs, and they all are making sure that they have the money available to cover the costs that they have as these projects go forwards. They are all keen to explore, obviously, technologies that make it more efficient, safer, and less expensive to do some of this removal work. There are some very clever technologies out there for the removal space, particularly. We deal with some really clever technology companies that have come to Australia to help us with this industry. We do podcasts and webinars the same as you folks do, and we actually did a webinar last week with it's actually a UK-based company, and what they've built is essentially a circular saw that works subsea, that has a long, they call it a spreader bar, like an extended arm on it with grabs on it. And this is designed specifically so you can go along when you've got to remove a pipeline from the seabed. You lay this thing on, it grabs hold of the length of the pipeline, and then the saw comes down and cuts it to length. You pick it up using these grabs, you put it in what they call a basket, so like a half shipping container on the seabed, and then you lift that basket up when it's full and you put it on a barge. And that is such an efficient way to remove this material. It comes out in nice clean cut sections. Because the ends have been nicely cut, you can then go through and you can recycle it, you can clean it out properly. those sorts of technologies are starting now to come through because people are seeing the volumes and the challenges and the technology needs that we have. It's, every day is a school day for me. Honestly, it is. Yeah.
And then you mentioned the offshore wind industry, which is gonna come under your sort of remit, as I understand. Now, we haven't actually built our first offshore wind farms, but we hope to do so sometime in the next 5 years. So what could we learn then from, for that industry as it sort of thinks about, I mean, those installations should last 30 years. I mean, they might be able to be upgraded or whatever. A lot of what they do is above the water, but they still need foundations, cables, and other things below the water. So what are we learning?
What can you learn? The learnings, I think the learnings, and this is not just for the offshore wind, this is for any offshore installation now, and it's being applied in new oil and gas installations offshore as well, is design for one of two things: either design to be removed or design using materials and seek approval as early as possible for the things that you don't want to remove to be allowed to be left in situ. So if you're going to use concrete, let's say, if you're going to use concrete for a part of this, make sure that that concrete and the reinforcement that's inside that concrete is as approvable or gets prior approval to be left in situ. If you're putting other structures in, design them in such a way that they can be relatively easily removed. That way, when you come to take them out, you know exactly what you've got to do. You can plan for what your liabilities are. The above the waves piece, the turbine blades are, the early turbine blades are notorious for being very, very hard to recycle. But the new blades are being made with materials that are much, much, much more friendly to being recycled and reprocessed. Similar with all of the other equipment that's in there as well. That essentially it's built it in such a way that you can either remove and recycle, or or can have as best confidence as possible that the things that are going to be really hard to remove, like something like a pile into the seabed, has ideally been pre-approved for removals.
So have we been
Yeah.
left with any sort of fait accompli, which we rather wish we hadn't, because things were built 40 or 50 years ago, possibly not with recycling removing in mind?
I think in the oil and gas industry, there are a few of those around the world that are going to be an ongoing challenge that we have still got to address. There are some what they call concrete gravity structures. So these are essentially I talked about these steel jackets that we have the top sides on. We have a few that are made of concrete, and these things were not built to be removed. Now, concrete is a pretty benign material, but if you've got an 90,000 ton concrete structure, there's no way you're going to get that thing out of the water. So there's a few in Europe, there's a few in Canada's got a couple, there's a few off the Russian coast. We've got 3 in Australian waters. So that those, at some point, there will have to be a conversation held between the owners and the regulator to agree, what the future is and how we manage those. Beyond that, it's just dealing with these things on a case-by-case basis. As I say, things like the big trunk lines, so a big, a heavy-duty, big-sized pipeline that connects an offshore structure to an onshore processing plant. Some of those, because the gas pipe gets into those, is pretty clean. We could probably build a pretty solid case for those to be left in situ, but we have to go through all of the science and everything else to understand that leaving these in situ is not going to leave a legacy problem for future generations.
And I see that in your report you mentioned sort of net zero, and Australia has a target of net zero by 2050. So in what way does that sort of driving either the urgency or the scale of what you guys are doing? Because I guess net zero, I don't think it means no oil and gas production by 2050. That's probably unlikely, but it assumes a lot less than what's happening now.
Yeah, and that will be, I mean, it's to me personally, I think that's an inevitable transition that we will work through, that we will find that the older, less energy efficient facilities, through both their own age and also just the depletion of the fields that they're drawing from, will reach end of life and will be removed. And as they come out, the ones that are left and the ones that are still to be installed around the world, for that matter, will be cleaner and more efficient. So that will help to reduce a portion of that. The next space for us, the next space for me, then is the carbon sequestration space for some of these. The fields that we've drawn oil from and gas from over decades are the ones that scientists and geologists and so forth know the best about. So they're the ones that we know that we have the most confidence about repurposing for carbon sequestration. So we have an opportunity there potentially.
Potentially, yeah. I don't know whether the attempts so far have been particularly successful. They've either been sort of less volume or more expense than what has happened. But maybe we're just
it's
early
not
in
easy.
that industry. Yes,
It's not easy squirting gas 1,000 meters back down under the ground into something that looks like a sandstone sponge is not an easy thing to do, and we are learning a lot along the way. But it is, to my mind at least, and I'm not a geologist by any stretch of the imagination, but to my mind at least, it's something that we need to be exploring and we need to be looking at. Similarly, the likes of plastics and polymers, when we're recovering them, we have to find ways where we either reuse them as plastics and polymers, or we return them to a state where, such as a synthetic gas or a synthetic liquid, where we can then use it as an alternate fuel. There's a lot of, there's so many options. There's so many people doing some clever stuff in this space. But, I guess from our side in the decommissioning space, we're doing our piece to try and, close down safely, make sure that none of these wells ever leak into the future. That there have been a few instances, back in the day, we've been drilling wells around the world for about 150, 200 years.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, and let's just say 100 years ago, the technology to plug a well was fairly agricultural. I've literally seen photographs of, and I've spoken to friends who've found these, where the idea to plug a well was to drop a couple of cannonballs down it,
Okay.
or a tree trunk.
Okay.
Because, you're trying to fill a round hole, so you drop a tree trunk down it, or a telegraph pole or something like that. And then just
okay.
yeah, and then just hope that it works.
Well,
Yeah, we're a lot better at it now. We have some very, very well-established standards and technologies for plugging wells, which means now when we plug, and you drop a cannonball down a well, that is not going to stop gas coming around and leaking up and getting to the surface. Now, that's never happened in Australia. I've got to stress that. Our oldest wells are back to the 50s. We have not, to my knowledge, we've never plugged a well with a cannonball or a tree trunk. We've used high-grade cements and other materials to do our work here. But we need to make sure that when we're plugging wells, we plug them properly. And when we plug them properly, they will never flow again. You will never then get random leaks of gas coming out in, you hear stories from the US where an old well was found under a primary school and it's been leaking gas into the basement for a long time, or they find a well 15 meters below the ground in a car park somewhere, things that were plugged using these very old technologies. So part of what we're doing as well is making sure that when wells get closed, they get closed properly, they get closed for life, and they won't leak anymore.
Well, Dr. Francis Norman, thank you very much. Thank you for your organisation.
I've left you some very weird mental ideas here, haven't I?
I am. I'm a bit distressed by all the cannonballs and tree stumps sort of stuff down wells, but good to hear that hasn't happened in Australia. Well, really interesting stuff, and a lot of your work is actually going to be happening over your report. You've just done a report, Outlook. 5.7 million tonnes, $60 billion, and a lot of that, interestingly, is happening over the next decade, I guess, that focus in Victoria and some of the early offshore wells in WA. So you've certainly got a lot on your plate. So
my day job is very busy, but it's great to have these opportunities to talk more broadly. We don't get the chance to talk to folks like you that often, so to have this chance to come on here and talk is absolutely brilliant. So
yeah, it's been fascinating for us just to sort of look into a part of the industry that we really look at. So it's been really interesting. So look, we'll let you get on with your busy day, and thank you once again for joining this special episode of the Energy Insiders podcast.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to a special episode of Energy Insiders, brought to you by Energy Exchange Australia. from March 10th to 12th at the Perth Convention and Exhibition Centre. Meet over 200 companies, hear from 150 industry-leading speakers, and join thousands of professionals shaping the energy future, from oil and gas, decommissioning, CCS, hydrogen to renewables. This is your chance to connect with the entire supply chain under one roof. Best of all, it's free to attend. Secure your place now at www.exaexpo.com.au. Energy Exchange Australia, where energy leaders meet.